Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking once again about Storm Eowan, an exceptionally powerful storm which is expected to bring life-threatening weather to parts of Ireland and the UK on Friday. And in this video we're going to do a detailed, in-depth look at the track, the intensity of the storm, what's making it so strong, that kind of thing. I thought I'd start off though, as usual, by looking at one of the graphics I made. I made this literally just kind of half an hour ago, and it represents my current thoughts on what's going to happen with this storm. Now, it's just essentially a day away. It's Wednesday evening tonight, but by Thursday evening the impacts will start to be felt, and by Friday that's going to be when the storm is pushing through. You can see the centre of the low is likely to be just offshore, or not just offshore, but a little way offshore of Ireland around 3 AM in the morning. Ahead of that we're going to have strong gusty winds. It could be across the south, but generally across all of the UK and Ireland, strong gusty winds, maybe 50 to 60 miles an hour, but the strongest winds are really going to focus across parts of Ireland, Northern Ireland, Northern England and Southern Scotland during the early morning. By 10 AM the centre of the low is going to be just in between Northern Ireland and South of Scotland, and then by 5 o'clock it's exited out into the North Sea, having passed through northeast Scotland there. And you can see in these general regions, like I said, this southern Scotland, including the central belt, both Edinburgh and Glasgow, are in the risk zone for these very strong winds, likely more than 75 miles an hour here. Could be locally higher or lower depending on elevation, whether it rains, just local factors which could slightly moderate this forecast, but this is the rough outline. And then of course this region of Western Ireland, we're looking at likely more than 90 miles an hour wind gusts, possibly even 100 mile an hour gusts in spots. But these aren't the only hazards, and I'll talk about all the hazards in detail in this video. We are even looking at snowfall, not just across the Highlands. This is where I think snowfall will accumulate, but a fairly large region could see falling snow for a time early on Friday. And then also looking at heavy flooding rains across southern Scotland, northwest England, North Wales, South Wales, the far southwest, and Southern Ireland. So these are my current thoughts on the video, just to give you an overview of the timings, the rough regions, before we go more in detail. And we'll start off by looking at what's going on right now. So this is the live satellite imagery, and you can see what we call a very classic baroclinic leaf. Now this is, it's nothing more to it than it looks like a leaf, and this is what we often observe in the satellite pattern when when extratropical storms are rapidly deepening. And you can see that fairly typical shape. We've likely got the warm front in here somewhere, but really note, number one, how fast these clouds are moving, but how spread out this section is to the northeast side. And likely our centre of low pressure, is located just somewhere in here. So the jet stream is ripping off to the northeast, and you can see a similar thing in the water vapor satellite loop. This is the same, so satellite water vapor imagery, slightly different. The blue and green colours and white colours indicating moist air, the yellow and red indicating dry air. And you can see here's the centre of Storm Eowan right now. Like I said, not very developmental, but we've got a very classic look on satellite imagery. And notice how the winds to the northeast are, like I said, racing away. And also note this bit here, the wind's curving upwards, and that's a hint of the divergence in the upper levels of the atmosphere. Divergence removes air from the top of the storm. What has to happen is the air has to fill it from beneath, and as those winds rush in to fill the low, number one, the pressure drops, and also you get strong winds. So you can see the foundations for what we're expecting are already occurring in the live observations. In terms of these position and strength of the low, currently, as of this is 7 o'clock, we've got a low of around 1003 millibars, so very average. But what's not average is how fast it's deepening, because if we go to the very latest from 8 o'clock, it's already down to 1001. So it's currently deepening a rate of around 2 millibars an hour. Now, for context, for rapid explosive deepening, that's the official term, explosive deepening, explosive cyclogenesis, we're looking at 1 millibar an hour. So we're already doubling it. And I think I did a quick calculation yesterday which suggested we're looking at almost double the typical explosive deepening rate. So this is really an exceptional storm. In terms of position though, relatively on track with forecast, maybe a couple millibars stronger than we thought if you compare to, what was this, the 8 o'clock chart. That was indicating around 1000. Right now we've got around 1001, but this is an hour behind. And if we go back to 6 o'clock, the models were indicating around 1004 millibars, and what we had at 6 o'clock was 1003. So I'd say it's pretty much on forecast. No major changes anticipated at this time. So you may be wondering, what is the forecast? What are the impacts? I thought I'd start off by showing you the Met Aaron warnings in terms of the kind of impacts. And this is exceptional. All of the Republic of Ireland is under a red warning, the highest level of warning, which means we're going to see destructive wind gusts in excess of 130 kilometers an hour. That's 80 miles an hour if you're not familiar with kilometers an hour. But you can see danger to life. That's the number one thing. You need to take these warnings seriously if you're anywhere in these amber or red zones, because flying debris, I mean, that's the main hazard, but flying debris, falling trees, down power lines, these can literally kill you. And unfortunately, it's possible that people will die in this storm. But the thing you can do to prevent that is stay at home if you can. Avoid making unnecessary journeys. So hopefully stay home from work and school if you can. You can see the impacts here. I'll put both of the links in the description so you can check for yourself, because it's important to be aware of the warnings. The Met Office, not a red warning yet, but a very large amber warning of wind. We also have just seen the addition of yellow warnings of wind for the south. So really the entire country, I mean not really, yes, the entire country is at risk of strong winds, but in particular these regions amber, and I'm expecting an upgrade to red, probably across Northern Ireland into northwest England and southern Scotland, this sort of region. Like to see a red warning, maybe the central belt as well, and probably an expansion of the amber warning further north as well. So we're looking at really the highest level of storm, and I'll run through the model output and then give you a bit of insight into what I think about it. So this is the arpeg model. Now this is the highest end scenario we're probably going to be seeing. So take this as the worst case, and hopefully we're going to hope for something better. Bear in mind the arpeg often does really overdo those wind speeds, so take that into consideration. But still, you can see there's Thursday evening, there's our low. And yesterday I talked about the warm and cold conveyor belt in our storm. We've got a warm front here, we've got a cold front here. The warm air rises and then wraps around the head of the low. And as it rises in the warm sector, we get our warm conveyor belt. I mean, this is generally the strong winds, but not as strong as the cold conveyor belt. So as this pushes into the country on Thursday into Friday, we are going to see a period of strong winds, and this will come ahead of the main low. So by kind of midnight on, so the early hours of Friday, 1-2 a.m., we're all going to see our warm conveyor belt winds already hitting Ireland and Northern Ireland. Those are then going to spread into England, so even 50-60 mile an hour wind gusts appear likely on Friday morning during rush hour across the southeast of England there. I mean the whole country, even Scotland, seeing those wind gusts. But it's the cold conveyor belt, which I mentioned last time, is what we care about, because as that warm air rises, it wraps around the centre of the low, it then descends rapidly around the backside, and that descent is dangerous because it accelerates, and as it accelerates, obviously the winds get faster, and you end up with very strong winds. And it's a bit of a positive feedback loop in the sense that the storm deepens, the stronger these processes become, and then they deepen, they help to fuel the storm. In this case, the arpeg model is slightly overdoing that feedback loop. It is showing winds, gusts of 160 miles an hour in pink. Same as yesterday, I had never seen these kind of model outputs before until today. Even for tropical cyclones, because they are not resolving the convection in the storms, while there are higher wind gusts, the models generally don't show those, at least the global models like the GFS and the European. So to see these models for an extra tropical cyclone is like insane. Genuinely, I have been looking at models for maybe since 2017-ish. I have never once seen anything like this, anything really remotely close to what this is showing in the vicinity of the UK and Ireland. So this is going to be a once in a generation storm. But you can see, even though those gusts weaken, by the time it pushes into the west coast of Ireland, you're still looking at widely winds of over 100 miles an hour, and then that's 6 a.m, so waking up to extreme conditions on the west coast. But even inland, you get very strong wind gusts into Northern Ireland, those then transferring into Cumbria, southern Scotland, the central belt, and then western Scotland during Friday afternoon and evening. By Saturday morning, still got strong winds on the north coast. So that's probably the highest end scenario. I think maybe the lowest end scenario, and it's weird to say lowest end because this is still extremely damaging, is the European model. I mean, actually, no, I don't think that's the lowest end. That's being realistic. It's probably the GFS here. Yeah, this looks about it. So also notice we've got a slightly weaker low, so just a tad to the south. We'll have to see what happens tomorrow, and I'll do a proper update tomorrow with comparing the position of the low to the models. So the GFS is a tad south, and that's because it's weaker. I explained the reasoning behind that in the last video. So that would bring exceptionally strong winds still, but more across Ireland, less across Northern Ireland, and then those winds transfer more into northwest England than southern and central Scotland. So I would say the GFS, just because it's weaker, is in the slightly southerly track. Most other models at the moment are favouring the northerly track, and I would comfortably favour that track as well, because the upper level pattern is just exceptionally favourable for deepening. Let's take a look at the jet stream. We're changing the level of the wind forecast to 300 hectopascals. That's around 9-10k above the ground where the jet stream is, and you can see here's our ribbon of exceptionally strong winds in grey over 200 miles an hour. Rarely do we get 200 mile an hour winds this widespread in the jet stream, but notice how our storm is sitting on the perfect basically the best of both worlds, because we want it to be number one in the left exit, which is here, because this is our jet streak where we've got strong winds. There's a left exit, so diffluence occurring there, and then at the same time, I mean, you can also see the diffluence because it's kind of curving outwards like this, but where we've got the secondary kink, it's also sitting in the right entrance here, and as it moves into this region, that's when the deepening is properly going to accelerate. As you can see, a lot of diffluence going on where the wind where it kind of feathers and deforms out like this. The deforming of the jet stream indicates a lot of rapid divergence, and the storm is deepening very quickly, and you can see that's exactly what happens, and so we're probably looking at near record pressure levels for some regions, likely to dip below 940 millibars, at least below 950 millibars. So I mean, this entire region is going to see very strong winds. In terms of some more high-resolution output, let's take a look at the UKV model. So first, let's take a look at the precipitation risk. So rain and snow. You can see we're going to have a band of showery rain pushing through tomorrow afternoon. Possibly thunderstorms across the southwest, so that's not really going to be the focus for many. Could be some strong winds along the south coast, flashes of lightning, but notice we get this big warm front pushing in around 3 AM on Sunday. Across high ground, especially northern England, southern Scotland and the Highlands, we're looking at temperatures to be sub-zero. So actually, as this precipitation bumps into the colder air, we're going to see falling snow for a time. Now, emphasise falling because right behind that you've got the mild sector, so things will quickly turn mild, at least across northern England and southern Scotland. But notice the Highlands still, especially across higher ground, remaining below zero during the morning. So we're likely to see continued snowfall during the day, so it could lead to some significant accumulations there, hence this blue outline here. Also note the heavy rain, especially orographically enhanced across the northwest of England, South Scotland, parts of Southern Ireland as well there, and then also South Wales and the southwest. So we could see 40-50 millimeters of rain with that. In terms of the winds, now do take this with a grain of salt, because the UKV overdoes wind speeds sometimes a lot, but this is extreme. In purple, that's the top of the scale, and we're seeing the top of the scale even inland. I've never seen anything remotely close to that, and even if you think, okay, the UKV is overdoing it by 10 miles an hour, well, that's still 100 mile an hour winds along the coast, 90 mile an hour winds inland, which is more than severe enough. And I don't think it's going to be overdoing it by less than I don't think it's going to be over forecasting the winds by more than 10 miles an hour. I think that'll be extreme. But you can see in this kind of scenario, we're looking at the entire west coast of Ireland seeing very, very strong winds. And those winds even transfer inland and then by the afternoon into kind of more central areas. So that's kind of the model output, giving you a rough idea of the wind speeds. I want to do a bit more insight into the kind of actual meteorological processes, and I thought I'd start off by looking at the 850 millibar winds. So these are the winds just above the ground, and that can often be a nice way to forecast the wind speed, because it ignores the frictional effects of the land, the mountains, the trees, the buildings. They all kind of slow down the wind at the surface. So using the wind just above the ground, about 1.5 kilometers, can give you a better idea of what to expect. And this is that warm conveyor belt I was talking about. This area of enhanced kind of 60-70 knot flow is going to be across the south by kind of around 5, 6, 7, 8 on Friday morning. And I think this could be a bit of an underrated threat, because if you take a look at the sounding, the winds... Oh, okay, never mind. I mean, you can just read off here. The winds just above the ground are absolutely ripping. 70 to 80 knots, which is kind of 75, 85, even in some spots 90 miles an hour. And obviously, that's not going to translate to the surface. We're probably looking at maybe half that, so 40 to 50 to 60. But even 50, 60 miles an hour in the south, which is not really that prepared for severe weather, and during the rush hour, that could cause some disruption, hence the Met Office amber warning. I mean, the lapse rates in the lower half of the atmosphere are not steep, and this is a problem if you like strong winds, because the stronger winds just above the surface, it's hard for them to kind of travel downwards if it's not very unstable, because when it's not unstable there's not a lot of mixing of the air particles, the atmosphere in the lowest 1 kilometer. So that's going to probably prevent these strongest winds from reaching down to the surface. Hence, even though the winds above the ground are ripping, the models are suggesting generally more moderated wind speeds, 40 to 50 miles an hour. But I think that could be a somewhat of a surprise, because all the attention will be in areas further west, and rightfully so. But you may be caught off guard by it being fairly unsettled across the south and east on the morning. Here's that cold conveyor belt I talked about, and you can see, I mean, that's just crazy. 120 knots, that's probably like 130, 35-ish miles an hour. So for those winds to be just above the surface, and the difference is, across the Atlantic, look at that lowest level. The lapse rates are very, very steep. They're moving up to the left. That indicates the wind will be turbulent, the air will be mixing, and so some of that very, very strong winds will be descending down to the surface. And I mean, look at the hodograph. I don't think I've ever seen that before. That's insane. In terms of the kind of dry air descending, I thought I'd show you this nice thing. This is weathernerds.org. It's a nice model viewer, and we can take a cross section of this storm on the, I think this is a GFS model, yeah, this is Friday morning, I think, yeah, Friday at 3 a.m. And if we get a cross section, what you see here is that cold conveyor belt, of the low pressure system descending with that dry air. And do you remember when I talked about the air descending, it accelerates? You can really clearly see that. This dry air is punching round the top side of the storm, and it's then wrapping down towards the ground. So areas just below this region are going to see extremely strong winds. And I often check these kind of vertical cross sections with our low pressure systems, and you often get this pattern, but it's fairly weak, it's fairly diffuse. This is an extremely strong one, and to see this 10 relative humidity compared to the kind of 80 to 90, even 100 range, that's exceptional. I just can't recall seeing anything like this on model output, and the models producing these strong winds, it's 100% for a reason, because we're having all this air just accelerating towards the ground, and simply kind of by physics, that's just going to speed up, and on the surface, it's going to get very, very windy, and you can see kind of the colder air in there as well. So, I mean, to be honest, having said they could be overdoing the winds, I think we're likely to see wind gusts in excess of 100 miles an hour across the Irish coast. And I'd just like to quickly zoom in to Ireland in particular. And if we take a look at the sustained winds, usually in the UK, are generally pretty meagre. They're nothing that exceptional, 40, 50 miles an hour. In this case, we're looking at sustained winds of 80 miles an hour offshore. That's on the lower end of the forecast guidance. Sorry, I've got a bit of a cough. Even the GFS has sustained winds of 95 miles an hour. The winner, in terms of how extreme can you go, is of course the arpegge with sustained winds of 120 miles an hour. Now, this is the equivalent of the other hurricane, and usually in the UK we say, oh, hurricane force gusts, i.e. wind gusts of 74 miles an hour. This is hurricane force winds, and the sustained aspect to the winds is much more dangerous because it's just constantly pushing on all the structures, the trees, the infrastructure, everything. So it's generally going to be a lot more severe, and even across parts of the coast of Ireland we could be seeing those hurricane force winds inland, the coast and a little way inland. And in particular, I'm looking at Gway Bay as one of the worst affected areas from the storm, from Storm Eowan, and that's because of the shape of the land. It's a nice sort of funnel-shaped inlet, and what happens is the winds, there's reduced friction in these areas, and as such they increase, or they don't increase, but they maintain very high levels as they push inland, and this entire tongue of areas just downstream from Gway Bay are likely, in my opinion, to see the highest winds. And you can see that playing out quite nicely on high resolution models like the Arome. And I don't know if I said this earlier, but this is because Gway Bay is facing into the winds. The winds are coming in this direction, and you can see they really kind of funnel in. So these areas are showing winds of 100 miles an hour. That's inland. This is exceptional. I genuinely cannot recall seeing model output like this. These are 110 mile an hour winds just offshore. Genuinely insane. And you can see for the rest of Ireland and Northern Ireland on the Arome, severe wind gusts of 70 to 80 miles an hour, and then those strong winds push into the Irish Sea. Another thing to consider is, because of the shape of the bay, we could be looking at a very severe storm surge actually. And if I get the waves out, let's use the wind-driven wave chart just to kind of show that it's not due to other reasons. But you can see where we have the kind of on the south side of the low, you have very, very strong winds physically pushing the water. The winds are physically pushing on the water and moving them into waves, but also a surge. And another thing to consider is the pressure is very, very low. And the same way you kind of suck on a straw, it lifts the water through the straw. When you have very low atmospheric pressure, it physically pulls the water up. And I do think we could be seeing a very rare but proper storm surge across the west coast of Ireland, especially because we have these wind-facing bays and inlets. You can see one here, Gway Bay I talked about, another one's here, here, here. All these areas will be facing into the wind. The wind will funnel the water inside. The pressure's low, and so we could be seeing sea levels maybe 2, 3, maybe even 4 meters above average. Now, the big saving grace is going to be it's likely to be low tide in these regions when the storm strikes. So hopefully the water will be fairly far out. I think the Atlantic's got a fairly decent tidal range, so we can hope that even if this does occur, because the tides will be low, the damage and disruption will be limited. It's unlikely to have a major shift in the forecast so that the winds will hit at peak tide. So I think probably we could be maybe dodging a bullet with this one. We'll have to see. I'm not like an expert in hydrology, so if you get flood warnings along the coast, do take them very, very seriously. And I mean, there's a general good common sense. If you get any warnings, please take them seriously. So that's about it for today. This is the graphic as a summary again. Exceptionally strong winds likely across parts of Ireland and the UK. Going to be seeing some severe impacts from what's likely going to be a historic storm. So please take everything, all the warnings very seriously, keep yourself safe, and I'll do another video tomorrow looking at how the storm's progressed and more kind of detailed thoughts on what's going to happen. But anyway, take care and thank you for watching. Bye bye.